Hey, all you cyber philosophers out there. Finally, I am getting to this video lecture. Maybe thankfully the last actual video lecture that you'll hear from me. So first of all, I want to say thank you. I've thoroughly been enjoying the discussion board, and I've thoroughly enjoyed your insights into that article on the historical philosophical traditions that have kind of informed educational practice over the millennia. And particularly very happy with some of you reacting with questions and commentary about thinking through your own teaching approach and how it's different than some of your colleagues, and maybe beginning to see how philosophical work might better inform our practice as teachers. So I want to take just a little bit of time here and kind of re-emphasize that point. That is, I find that philosophical work, when it is understood clearly and practiced accordingly, is the most practical work that any teacher, and I suppose maybe any human being, might do, in that one's philosophical understandings, one's theoretical understanding, one's belief system relative to what we're about as human beings must be, I would say, individually and maybe socially clarified, if in fact we're going to act wisely on those understandings. And if we're not acting on ideas or on our understandings of our existence and our experience, then we are probably doing things that are unwise. As Socrates famously exclaimed, the unexamined life is not worth living. And the reason for that is that if one does not examine one's beliefs, then we might do some pretty stupid kinds of things, so including those of us in a classroom. So I'm going to just take up a few of these traditionalisms, talk my way through it a little bit, through them a little bit, so that we can again kind of emphasize the differences in teaching behavior that will appear when we have differing philosophical conceptions. And the two kind of core questions I want us to focus on here to get at these differences and to kind of fill in some spots, so to speak, in your PowerPoints and in your discussions and that kind of thing, are the questions of what constitutes reality and what constitutes truth. So, I'm also going to throw in a couple of classical philosophical quandaries that we might consider that would also get us to seeing how these differing conceptions lead to differing understandings and differing ways of acting and understanding the world around us. So the kind of the cornerstone of really of most of Western thinking is in fact the work of Plato by way of the Socratic Dialogues, and probably most importantly found in his classic book, The Republic, where he envisions what a utopian state of existence might entail. So I would always suggest to anyone who wants to call themselves an educated human being, particularly in the West, to read at least some of The Republic. I think it's an indispensable text for all of us. So Plato, of course, is the father of what is known as idealism. And idealism suggests that reality, that is what is important to know, and truth are contained in ideas. So hence idealism. And it can get a little bit strange, but bear with me for a second, because it may not be quite as strange as it initially on its face may seem. What Plato argued by way of the Socratic dialogues is that somewhere early in his writings it seems to be that these things are floating around somewhere in the ether, so to speak, and then as his philosophy kind of becomes more mature, he begins to, it looks like, want to talk about these things that I'm going to share with you here in a second, in the mind of a god or several gods and goddesses and that kind of thing. And he called them the forms. And so the idea is that there is a perfect form for everything that exists here in human reality, or what we typically call human reality. And everything that we see here in terms of our understanding of what we typically call reality is simply a bad copy of the original perfect form. So, for example, he talks in one of the dialogues, and I forget which one at the moment, but he talks about, for example, horses. And so what he says is there is a perfect form of true horseness that exists, and every horse that exists within our reality is simply a bad copy of that perfect prototypical horse. And for any human being to become wise about horse or horses would entail the pondering of the essential idea that horseness represents. And if a human being spends their entire existence simply toiling in this reality, the reality that is not the one that contains the perfect ideas or forms, that human being will never, ever, ever come to a complete and full understanding of true horseness. Now, of course, horses is a minor form. There are the big, important forms, including truth, justice, virtue, goodness, and kind of the top of the hierarchy, the beautiful. So, given his idea that we exist in a world of imperfect copies, he says that we have to find a way to maybe initially experience, for example, horseness in our reality, but to then begin to move away from this real concrete existence in order to get to understanding what true horseness or what true goodness or what true beauty entails. And you can only do that given his understanding that everything of truth is really in ideas. You can only get to that by discussing with a teacher, in terms of educators, those ideas. Hence his advocacy of what is called the Socratic method. And the Socratic method is simply a question and answer led usually by a wiser older human being, often called a teacher, wherein that teacher ponders questions with his or her students, and in that discussion you begin to clarify what ideas mean, and you come to some understanding of the essence of that idea, whether it be plot structure, or whether it be the Pythagorean theorem, or whether it be even the keeping of a checkbook. So, you probably have heard and maybe read and maybe remember one of his very well-known stories that he uses with all of this, and it's the allegory of the cave. And generally, the story goes something like this. There's a cave, and there are a lot of people chained to the cave walls, and all you can really see from within the cave is it looks like there's a fire burning off in the distance, and there's smoke and fog drifting around, and you can only see shadowy images from your position being chained on the wall. And sometime along the way, a person manages to get disattached from the wall. And once they become disattached, they climb up out of the cave, and they discover the sun. And initially the sun blinds this person. But what this person has discovered is that she has found that the existence that she had been experiencing prior to her escape from the cave was in fact nothing but a form of oppression and slavery. And that in order to escape that oppression and slavery, one is required to kind of leave the world of concrete existence, ponder the ideas, and those ideas are represented by the blinding sunlight. And initially these ideas are very, very difficult to see until we allow our eyes to adjust, which would be a metaphor for allowing our minds to let loose of what this reality tells us so that we can find actual truth and goodness and beauty. Now, this person comes back down into the cave and then starts telling all the other cave dwellers who are still chained to the walls, hey, this is all a lie, the truth is out there, let's go. And as is, of course, usually the case with visionaries who come and tell us stuff that we just simply don't want to believe, he or she in the story was rejected. By the way, I say he or she because Plato actually found that women could be what he called philosopher kings, but there would not be a gender issue there, which for his time period is quite a progressive idea. So what does all this mean for teaching? If we were to take the teaching of, let's say, plant identification, an idealist teacher would never, or very rarely, want his or her students to actually go out and look at and touch and feel different plants to kind of begin to understand why they are identified in such a way. But that teacher would want to spend a whole lot more time exchanging questions and ideas with the students, basically leading them to the understanding that the truth of the matter is contained in the ideas, and those ideas can only be understood completely by getting ourselves away from this concrete reality. So, question answer, let's get to the essence of plant identification or whatever the topic is, and then we will have some understanding, and an understanding that might lead us to the bigger understandings concerning, for example, the nature of beauty. Okay, all right, now Plato had a student, and that student, of course, was Aristotle, and I always kind of imagined Aristotle finally getting fed up with his mentor and saying, look, Dr. Plato, Mr. Plato, you are completely wrong in this. In fact, as Aristotle argued, we can't develop concepts without, in fact, sensory experiences, right? So plant identification, you really can't come to any understanding of plant identification unless you go out and interact with plants through our senses. And of course, Aristotle is the founder of what was then called realism. So, what is real and true, we'll get to truth here in a second, what is real for the realists is what we seem to perceive through our senses. So again, as a teacher coming from a realist perspective and teaching plant identification, he or she would want the students to get out there, touch and feel, see these plants. Now, on the other hand, realists would also make the argument that what is real is real is real is real, and it is completely independent of human interpretation. So I want you to keep that in mind. It is completely independent of human interpretation. A tree is a tree is a tree is a tree. A pine tree is a pine tree is a pine tree is a pine tree. Okay? And so the idea with realists' understanding of truth is that what is true is true. And so when we figure out that something we once believed to be true is no longer true, a realist would say, well, It was always true. However, we just got it wrong. So it's the discovery kind of approach to learning. And as we, the hope goes, as we begin to come to better understandings, we get closer and closer to the actual truth. So here's a couple of one of those old philosophical quandaries. One of them goes like this: if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Now the realist would of course say, absolutely it makes a sound, because what happens in reality is completely independent, does not depend on a human being there to interpret that event. So if a tree falls in the woods and it makes a sound here, it's certainly going to do it when there's no one there to experience it. The second old quandary is less philosophical and I guess maybe historical, although of course certainly has some philosophical implications. Whether it's true or not, and there would be some fight, I think, over this historically, but as the story goes, once upon a time, most humans, at least European humans, believed that the world was flat. So, however, when that first person went over the horizon and disappeared, and in fact did not fall off the earth, but managed to come back, suddenly that truth was thrown into turmoil. And the realists would say, well, yeah, look, we just didn't have the means to understand the truth of the matter, and we're increasingly getting closer to the truth of the Earth's shape, and it wasn't flat. We then got to a place where we could reasonably say we thought that the Earth was round. Now, as it stands today, the Earth is not round. The Earth is a spherical shape, and again, that has to do with advances in science and technology that we now believe allows us to understand the Earth is spherical. Now, that does not mean that we might not become even more advanced in scientific understanding and find that maybe the Earth is not spherical, but it's some other shape, and that might be shown, again, by advances in science and technology, at which point the realists would say, well, we're getting closer to the truth of the matter. Maybe one day we'll get it. Okay? All right, hold on to those ideas, because we're going to move to pragmatism. Pragmatism is, of course, the philosophy of John Dewey, William James, and some of those folks. And William James particularly completely changed a lot of people's thinking about the nature of truth. What William James said is that nothing comes in existence prepackaged with a truth. In fact, he said, I think rather simply and rather beautifully, truth, and this is a quote, truth happens to an idea. So, if we were to go back and look at the truth that the Earth was flat and then was round and now is spherical, again, the idealists would say, well, look, we interact with our senses, we discover, and we hopefully discover increasingly more, we get closer to the truth. The pragmatists, however, disagree with that, by way of William James. What William James says is that our truths are basically socially constructed. And when those truths no longer work, so that's the pragmatic part of it, right? Pragmatists and the pragmatic kind of approach is that we look for things that work. And so when a truth stops working, we then reconstruct a new truth that will help us explain that which the old truth could no longer explain, right? So what works? So it worked for us, as an example, to believe that the Earth was flat until something happened wherein that truth could no longer explain some important matters. So if somebody came back, right, from the flat earth, oh my gosh, the world must not be flat. And then the pragmatists argue that we then go about reconstructing that truth into a brand new truth that will explain these matters more clearly. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, gosh, that kind of sounds like existentialism, where each individual human being gets to reconstruct and decide whatever they find true. Well, yes and no. The pragmatists will say that we are encompassed by some physical facts that we simply cannot change in terms of our truth rendering, right? Here's another example. One time, unfortunately, we generally viewed, at least a lot of folks generally viewed minorities as really not human beings, right? Now, thankfully and slowly but surely, we came to a realization that simply could not explain human existence, and so we reconstructed that truth, at least partially, but I think we're still working at it, to begin to say, no, a human being is a human being is a human being. Another old scientific kind of truth was that we once believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and that everything rotated around the Earth, until the Copernican revolution, wherein we decided that the sun, right, is the center and everything rotates around it. So again, a pragmatist would say, well, truth is dependent upon what works. We recreate what is true, thereby creating a new truth that explains things that could not be explained previously. The realist would say, no, the sun has always been the center of the universe. We just had it wrong. Now, if we were to go back to the idealist would say, well, look, none of that matters. Truth is not contained in physical existence anyway. It's contained in the way that we conceptualize as we try to get a hold of the essential truths of, for example, earthness. If a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? The pragmatist would say, well, it certainly does make a sound as long as the idea that it makes a sound helps us understand our existence better. If there's a time when that truth does not help us, that it does not explain, then what we would do is reconstruct that truth, again, socially, and come to an agreement about what is true about that. The realist would say, well, of course, it makes a sound, and the idealist, again, would say, well, who cares? If you're out there, it's probably just a distraction from discovering actual, true-making tree soundness, and so it should be ignored. Okay, a pragmatist would be, in terms of a teaching approach, very similar to a realist. They believe in that knowledge comes by way of experience. Now they also believe that coming out of those experiences we may reconstruct truths. Of course, the realists would not say that. The pragmatists are very project-oriented because of that, very student-centered. In other words, for a realist teacher, they would say, look, there's only one way to classify and understand plants, and we've already got it. I want you to go out and experience it, but there's going to be no change in this understanding. Pragmatists might very well say to students, look, here's a project on plants. Maybe you can come up with a better way to classify plants that would work better, right? Again, the focus on what works. So they would have the kids working together on projects, going outside, and then constructing their own understandings of what these projects might mean. So there you have it. Okay. I'm going to move to just one more, and this is, I've already seen some reactions to this one that I think on the discussion board that I really do think a lot of you really got it, and I think it's raised some important questions. In fact, we may, I've kind of been looking to see what interests seem to be percolating kind of out of what we've read and what we've talked so far. And one of them seems to be this concern with behaviorism, right? Of course, behaviorism, in my opinion, comes from some people, in my opinion, who were kind of insane a little bit. I mean, Skinner, Watson, who did some strange kinds of behaviorist things with his own children. And, of course, the history of behaviorism goes straight out of Pavlov and his dogs, in that, at least with dogs, and then with Skinner and his rats and pigeons, I believe was Watson, as well as his own kid, that we could condition people to do what we want them to do. And I want you to pay close attention to the language here. It is certainly not about the student, right? It is about getting them to do what I, as the teacher or school or district, want them to do. And that is achieved by way of punishments and rewards. And this one, it just makes me crazy. So the basic behaviorist belief is that human beings are really nothing more than a collection of external stimuli that fatalistically lead us to particular places, and implies that there is no such thing as human free will. Okay, I want you to keep that in mind. The logical implication of behaviorism, of punishments and rewards to get kids to do what we want them to do, implies that there is no human free will. Now, I always have to give one caveat to all of this. It might be that there are some human beings in the world who come into their lives with some unfortunate disabilities or inabilities, and who just need some basic training in order to be able to function in the world. And I'm not a special ed person, so I'm going to push that off to the side because I'm not informed, trained well enough to know enough about that world. However, in the rest of the world, what you see going on in schools is, in fact, a very, very strongly behaviorist centered philosophy of teaching and learning. And you see this in all kinds of ways, with smiley faces on papers, with candy handed out to get kids to do what you want them to do. I'll tell you, my first 2.5 years of teaching, I was that behaviorist teacher. 3 days before I started my first year of teaching, I went to first year teaching orientation, and I sat in on an assertive discipline workshop. And I was scared to death of one matter, and really one matter only when it came to teaching, and that is managing a classroom. And again, you hear the language, right? It's managing those kids in your classroom. I was scared enough that I adopted one of their approaches. And that approach was to get a jar for each class of my 6-period English high school day, and then go buy a bunch of marbles. And so this is the way it worked. I had the first day of class. I would then say, hey, tomorrow we are going to start class with journal writing. If you would please have a journal, a pen, and you'd be seated and ready to write, that would be fantastic. So, second day, in come the students. Of course, I had 9th and 10th graders, mostly 9th graders. And of the 25 to 30 in each section, I might have 2 or 3 who remembered on that second day to have a journal, a pen, and be sitting and ready to write. So, out come the marbles. And I would throw a marble into a jar with the student's name on it. Hey, look at James. He's got his journal out and his pen, and he's ready to write. Boom, I'm putting a marble in your jar for James. Here's one for Susie. Here's one for Nathan. All right? So, second day comes around, and the third day, and I had said on the second day, hey, we're going to start with journal writing. Please bring your journal pen. I would typically maybe get 10 that day. Each of the 10 would get a marble with their name on it. By the third day, everyone had pen, paper, journal sitting. I could get those kids to do just about anything I wanted them to do with a damn marble in a jar with their name on it. Okay, now, of course, this is greatly advantageous if you want to control other human beings, because they would do whatever I wanted. However, as the second year of my teaching kind of went on, near the end of it, I began to think, oh, what am I teaching these kids? What am I doing relative to their decision making? What are they learning about the value of writing and reading and discussing literature? They certainly were not learning that there is value in being able to communicate through writing with others or oneself, that there's value in expressing yourself through the written word, or that there's value in reading a piece of literature to see what it might say about one's own life. It was all about getting marbles in jars with their names on it. And so slowly and surely, by my early third year teaching, I eliminated that stuff. And I began to turn it over much more to them. I began to let loose control. I began to allow them to have free will in deciding. So now here's the thing. What does research tell us about behaviorism? Well, what it tells us is that as you extrinsically reward human beings, intrinsic motivation gets completely stripped away. And so those of you in middle school who scratch your heads and wonder why, and certainly by high school, students won't do anything unless they're paid or given something. Well, this is why, because they have learned that very early on in the institution of schooling. They have learned that what's real and what's true, it really has nothing to do with them being able to ponder those questions. It is simply to do and believe what others tell you so that you can get rewarded or avoid punishment. And yet, this is, in fact, the overriding practice in our public schools, and is increasingly that way, by way of rewards, just crazy rewards. For example, paying kids for their performance on a standardized test, because I guess if you pay a kid, they're suddenly going to get smarter. And then, the mother of all behaviorist policies, practices in schools is grades, right? I mean, think about it. You can get kids to do what you want by holding over them the fear of a bad grade, or holding over them the rewards of a good grade. So the question becomes, I believe, as teachers, what is it we want to accomplish? Do we want to accomplish the education of a human being who has free will, who has his and her own interests, who has what I see to be a universal, at least initially, a universal curiosity? If you ever spend time around little ones, you see that curiosity. And I don't think we have to look too far to find the cause for the elimination of that curiosity over time. It is, in fact, behaviorist tactics most oftenly put into play in the institution of schooling. So what do we want? We want free individuals? Do we want slaves who do what we want? Do we want classrooms that are quiet and in complete control, and so that we have a nice existence as a teacher? Or do we want to go a little further? Do we want to think about pragmatic realist, idealist, humanistic approaches that actually kind of value the individual human being. If we are doing behaviorist stuff, it does in fact imply a belief in the teacher that there is no such thing as human free will. So I ask you to give that some thought. I also ask you to then kind of look back at what you've said in your ISM presentations, at what has been said by others on the discussion board, and really ponder, what do I believe about this stuff? What do I believe? Where is truth? What's the nature of truth? Does it exist pre-made, as the idealist would believe, and to a large extent as the realist would believe? Or is truth something that we build together? And what does any or all of that say about the teacher behaviors that we should engage in? The stuff that we do with our young people on a daily basis. The tools that we utilize and what those tools might be saying to little human beings about what it means to be a fully engaged, experiencing human being in the world. What does technology do to us? And those kinds of questions. I hope that you've seen that one's beliefs about these big, important human questions do, and when reflected upon, may want you to change things you've done, stuff you believe, because it seems to me that one's teaching practice is done ethically only when one is reflected on their own understandings of human existence, human experience, human development, and ultimately what we mean by an educated human being. Okay, well, I'll stop there. I've probably gone on longer than you can stand to sit there and watch, so my apologies for that. I will be hopping back on the discussion board, if not this afternoon. By the way, it's Monday, September 12th. And if I'm not jumping on back later this afternoon, I will do so tomorrow. And I would like you to begin to maybe speak a little more to any interests you have. As I said early on, we're going to gather up into groups oriented around interests. I've already started a Google Doc that I will share with you as I've kind of begun seeing things. Just so you know, the things I've seen is an interest in behaviorism and thinking alternatively about that kind of understanding of human existence relative to our classrooms. I've seen project learning kind of bubble up a bit. Of course, given that many of you are ed tech folks, the question of technology and its underlying kinds of ideologies and impacts has been bubbling up, as well as its use as a tool. So those are kind of the ideas that I've seen coming to the fore, and given the number of just so you know, kind of structurally how we will pull this off. Given the number of ed tech folks and that interest, it might be that we end up with 2 or 3 or even 4 small groups who get together and talk about questions about technology. I expect the project-based learning stuff is coming up, because I know a lot of local districts are kind of moving in that direction. It might be that we have 1 or 2 groups like that. Other issues that are quite at the fore in contemporary educational kind of times, questions of gender, questions of race and poverty, questions of homelessness and what kinds of impacts maybe homelessness and poverty have. So as you jump on the discussion boards, I'll be looking to see for a couple more of those interests, and I hope that within a week or two I will have a document to share with you so that you can sign up for the group that you are most interested in kind of pursuing further. So, alrighty. I'll see you soon. I hope you have a great day, a great week. It's beautiful outside, so I apologize for dragging you inside for the last 35 or 40 minutes. So go out there and enjoy the weather. All right. See you.